everybody. It is Mike Levin on Monday, September 27th, 2021. On my way back from dropping off my kid. Most of the way home, really, but I figured I'd shoot off a video because there's so much swirling around in my head on my work. There's a lot going on in my personal life, too. I just got my kid the iPhone 13 mini 512 gig for, let's call it daddy child a day. And I also got a kayak so that we can all go kayaking now on the Delaware River together as a group. And on the professional front, which is probably what I need to work out, what I need to think through next steps, I might be working straight through the night. I might take a nap, wake up early, but I got my work cut out for me because I'm updating my Pipulate package in PyPy. Pip install Pipulate. It's my little Swiss Army knife of SEO, free and open source SEO tools, and whatever really I need to build my deliverables du jour for my clients, in which case I have one exclusive client. It's my company I work for, Ziff Davis. I put into the Pipulate library. Well, I got to modify that. I don't put into the Pipulate library. I put into a private GitHub repo for fear of letting out anything proprietary that I think is being too generous. So the stuff that I don't mind giving out to the rest of the world goes into Pipulate, so it tends to be a little bit more sparse and maybe not quite as up to date as ML SEO. But every once in a while comes a freshening, and the freshening is a coming. And I tore out my old sequential crawler because, you know, people use Screaming Frog in the field of SEO all the time, or web-based crawlers, or cloud-based crawlers, I should say, like Deep Crawl. But all this stuff is expensive and hard on memory, and you can't use your favorite developer techniques like regular expressions. Again, well, there are but it's on the crawl while you pull it down. But now that I have concurrency under my belt, you make a crawl concurrent, then you do list comprehensions against the entire website. So you can do element extractions, X for X in list being an entire crawl of a website. So title for title in website. And then you can do beautiful soup against the title. Well, no, you did beautiful soup really in title for title, and that's what pulled the title out. But then you can do regular expression matching, or more specifically fuzzy regular expression matching against, say, some text you're sitting on and the body copy. Some cleaning will be necessary. I'm going to probably stem and stop word. And there's this other thing you can do. I always forget the name of it, but it makes me think of lemurs, Madagascar lemurs. It's like lemuization or something, which basically has a little bit of concept of more than just root words. Stemming gets root words, so running becomes run. But there's a lot of word variations that resist stemming, like ran. Well, let's go with ran. And so that other version of stemming deals with that. It's very language-specific stuff, so you gotta tell it what language you're working in. I think it mostly defaults to English. But I'll clean my data. I'll clean my body copy data of a web crawl, which includes potentially stripping out the HTML and the navigation, so it's just, the content of each page. And then I'll do regular expression matching to see if something appears, I guess, first in the title, then in the meta description, then in the body copy. Perhaps most difficult and least importantly in the body copy. I talk about the 80-20 rule a lot. So, the project is going to be, I would estimate 10 to 50 times slower and more difficult. Not that it's a hard project in the first place. So 10 times more difficult is only a little difficult if the body is included in these sequence matching lookups. Fuzzy matching, sequence matching. So, you always look to the Google standard library first. So you ask yourself, is there anything in the natural language text processing and NLTP, the natural language processing NLPT, the natural language package. And usually there is. You get most of that stemming stuff out of there. And then you ask yourself for the matching, is there anything in the standard library? You've got both the difflib, which does standard Levenstein proximity matching, Levenstein distance scoring. And that's great when you have, say, like 2 fields. You say, I've got a dirty address and a clean address. How close is my dirty address? Meaning someone typed it in and they get stuff wrong, like the spelling of the street name, Stroud's B-U-R-G versus B-E-R-G, right? So fuzzy matching is great against 2 fields, but it's not so great about looking for the existence of one field in a fuzzy way inside another field, and inside a big field, inside big text, inside body copy of an HTTP request. So you got to look at other techniques than Levenstein distance scoring. And this comes up time and time again over the years. It's like such covered ground. I've written my own ways of doing it. I've used canned packages to do it. And on this go around, I'm gonna just once again take a crack at it using the standard library, which means both the sequence matching of the difflib and the natural language processing library. And it also means regex. Regex has added a little bit of fuzzy matching where the pattern doesn't have to exactly match. You can feed it a triple-digit parameter, which tells you how many substitutions there can be, how many deletions or missing components from your regex request there can be. And I think there's a third one. I forget it. It's something like errors. No, they're all errors. Well, anyway, it lets close matches on your regex get through with some kind of score telling you how many of each of those parameter arguments, how many substitutions, how many deletions. So standard library, yay. So what are the challenges? There's really not many challenges here except updating my Pipulate library with a new crawler so that I can crawl a site with maybe a few thousand or tens of thousands of URLs quickly and easily, drop the results into a local SQLite database using the SQLite dict package so I can deal with name value pairs. It all becomes very beautiful, more beautiful than in the past. I might have dropped this stuff into a CSV file so I could look at, I'd name one links.csv so I can look in there and see how many, links that were discovered, or I would name them things like discovered.csv and to do or still to crawl.csv. And crawling is all about list building and list deletion. You discover links, you crawl links, and as you crawl them, you have visited them, and your list of links goes from a to-do list to a done list. So I'm just slowing down to incredibly slow speed in front of me. And so, writing a web crawler is nothing more than grabbing a list of links off of a page and a little bit of housekeeping, because it's always, once you can grab a list of links off of a page and of course save the content of the page while you're there, so content gets thrown off here, the links you discover get thrown off here, and you never record a link more than once in your to-do list, because once you've visited a page, it's done and it goes into the already visited list, and you check against that list before you visit a new URL. You set a page limit of how much you can crawl, or maybe a regular expression of what pages it can crawl to restrain it to a directory of a site, or stuff like that. There's other little issues, but writing a crawler is trivial. So updating it to a concurrent crawler, I'm figuring, is also likewise fairly trivial, because the Only place where concurrency is an issue there is in your database, when you're throwing all your captured data into a database. And while SQLite isn't really so concurrent, you might use more of an enterprise-capable database for this type of stuff, except the APIs that let you do, say, key value manipulation on with a SQL database have been modified to make it look like you're using a concurrency, even though internally it's bottlenecking it down to sequential, insert. Low-end database works off of the file system and stuff with, 1C program, as the ringleader of it all. You shouldn't ask for it to be concurrent. So you fake concurrency. So I'm going to fake concurrency on the storing of the data, but that's no problem. With all the time saved on fetching the data, you can have this background task going where it empties out your queue. I might end up using this queue message. I forget exactly what it is, but it's what made the Jupyter Notebook interface so responsive. Message queue. There's a really neat message handler. Third party, you got to pip install it, it's a package, but it might be time for that. But I'm going to try and keep to as much covered ground as possible. So just freshen up the crawler and then apply fuzzy regular expression matches against entire websites that I've pulled down. And that's the work that's coming up. I felt like there was more I wanted to talk about, more that I needed to think through. Whenever this topic comes up, it always goes back to fuzzy wuzzy. When you start Googling how do you do this, it's fuzzy wuzzy this and fuzzy wuzzy that. And I'm like, I'm quite aware of stuff I could do with a standard library with a diff package already. Thank you very much. Fuzzy wuzzy fine. It's become popular the way these things do, like the curl library. Whereas, there's stuff built in that's, just as good. So, rolled my eyes and said, what is it I'm really trying to do? Well, after the crawl, you just got to do the standard data cleaning that you do for this sort of stuff. So I'm back in the world of stemming and stop word deletion. And then why is it difficult? Well, I want to see if this keyword appears in this URL anywhere, title, meta description, or body copy. And that feels like a fuzzy match, but it's not, because it's a small field to the left and it's a potentially great whopping big field to the right. So it took me a little bit of jogging my mind to go, Python regular expression engine has an 80-20 rule approach to this. That stuff I just described. So I use that. And what else is there? I guess let people know I'm freshening up the Pipulate package. It goes out of vogue. Almost no one uses it. It is one of my most hearted and followed packages in GitHub. My Linux distro, runs on the desktop of a Mac or Windows or Linux desktop version of Linux, a virtual machine, QEMU, tiny core Linux based version of Linux is my other popular library in GitHub, and people are constantly downloading that to cut their teeth on a really safe version of Linux without doing the whole Windows subsystem for Linux install. They say Linux ships with Windows now, the Linux kernel ships with Windows. This story is a little more complicated. If you really want the latest, greatest, there's still a few hoops you need to jump through. So what I used to use to scratch that itch, a portable nomadic version of Linux, write your code for one platform target, carry that platform target, that target platform with you as a nomadic server for the rest of your life. Well, so Pipulate was designed to run on Linux. That's a relationship between these two packages of mine in GitHub. And I used to put it on kooky little hardware to have stuff faster than virtual machines, especially QEMU. I showed you my Shiva plug, my Shiva plug servers. I showed you my Raspberry Pis. That Pipulate has run to produce SEO deliverables on all these different hardware platforms, but now it's all about not Docker, but Linux containers, the replacement to Docker for people like me. likes Docker. I know all about Docker. People will go, you just don't understand it. Yeah, look at Linux. You have an involatile core software boot, thing that doesn't change. That's your, Docker application container. And then you have all your changes you make. Well, you're supposed to map it to outside your container because you don't want those changes going on in your container because your container is pure and it's your original image. Well, you can either use the Linux tricks of just mapping in a real physical external hard drive, but then you start to lose some of the advantages of the virtualization and the containerization. You want your container's contents to be persistent, to have changes stay. I know that with Docker, you can sort of layer on the patches, right? Look at my Linux. I do that. That's how tiny core Linux works, and I'm quite familiar with it. But just because I did it for Linux doesn't mean I want it for my everyday work. And Mikey no likey Docker. Mikey likes LXC and more recently LXD. The D in LXD, people don't think of it this way, but it's for the daemon of the Linux system. The Linux system for running Linux system services, right? That's the D in LXD. So LXD is still really the management software, and LXC is still really the container format. And though you'll see the terminology used interchangeably, or people saying that LXC is obsolete, it's only the LXC management software that's obsolete. The containers are still perfectly valid. Well, anyway, those are my two popular packages in GitHub, Pipulate and Linux. Most everything else is private. I broke out the OAuth authentication, and I already updated Pipulate by incorporating my broken out OAuth package. So Pipulate now has OAuth as a dependency, and that's perfectly fine because sometimes you want OAuth to Google service authorization without all the overhead of Pipulate, because Pipulate imports gspread, Pipulate imports pandas. It's a whole lot of memory and overhead if you just want to, say, pull some data out of Google Search Console. So OAuth is now public as well, so that makes 3 public libraries, although I don't think people have taken up OAuth that much. It hasn't been around for quite so many years. And it's getting some nifty little features. Scope, the scope that you're asking for, the number of Google services, be it Search Console, Google Analytics, Google Spreadsheets, Google Photos, whatever it is. YouTube can now be listed in an external CSV file. You can put it in your Jupyter Notebook, right where you import OAuth, and OAuth will know to go for the scopes that you requested. It's a very clever way of parameterizing an importable library. Yeah, I'm learning all sorts of interesting tricks. And what else? I guess I can wrap this up real quick. I don't even know what the theme of this. So yeah, I got to get it real clear in my mind what my next steps are professionally. And I talk about SEO kata a lot. And particularly it's Python programming. It's common SEO tasks in Python to create deliverables, which happens to also be the very same tasks you have to do for a lot of data science things, mergers and acquisitions, reverse SEO, I like to call it. Find those websites that I guess I'll stop there. Can't talk about work too much, but I'm tickled pink with the flavor of SEO I've been doing a lot recently, where I might call it a reverse SEO. Find those sites that could be doing better. Find things that are near sort of a tipping point. Anyway, let me wrap it up real soon. So going through the checklist of things in my head, Pipulate needs put back into it my latest favorite ways to connect to Google Analytics and Search Console, a freshening up of the 2 most common data sources to hit. The concurrent crawler, that should be in there. And I'm thinking I might put my lexical matching, what is that? It's fuzzy match. It is not even a word for it, right? It's so difficult to say, what this stuff is. I think maybe histogram. histograms was one way I thought of approaching it, but I'm going to avoid building histograms and, scores like that, because that's the score that's coming back from regular expressions. The Python regular expression has matured a bit since my last doing of this sort of task. So, I'm going to use that 80-20 rule, fuzzy matching with regular expressions. So maybe I'll put that into the Pipulate library. Checklisting in my head. Pulling and pushing data in and out of Google Spreadsheets has never been so easy. GSpread has recently been updated to support formatting. I had previously imported both GSpread and PyGSheets. PyGSheet was another one because that supported formatting. It looked like it was going to be the heir apparent or replacement to GSpread, which itself is almost not necessary because that dates back to before the Google API formalization, before the Google Developer Console, certainly before the Google Cloud Platform, when you had to use the GData API. The GData API comes before all this latest stuff for connecting to Google services, and it was Google's way of connecting to spreadsheets, Google Spreadsheets, before all that developer support stuff existed. GSpread was created at that time and was pretty necessary to simplify the difficult GData API, but they cleaned the Spreadsheets API up and you can use it natively. In fact, I do that quite a bit, and I've thought about pulling out the GSpread dependency in Pipulate because the native Google Spreadsheet API is just that much better than it used to be. But frankly, it's the work of doing it that makes me not want to do it. Almost did it over formatting because once it was import 2 third-party libraries to get an easy, pulling and pushing data grid API, right? Think of it as pulling out rectangular regions of data from a spreadsheet, doing manipulations to it, and pushing that rectangular altered shape back into the spreadsheet. That's the Pipulate API. So I could do that without GSpread these days, and I just haven't because of laziness. But now that GSpread caught up and has supported formatting, I've got the temptation to add some light formatting to Pipulate to optionally support column headers, which is something I would have done separately. Column titles, spreadsheet titles across the top of your rectangular data region, across the top of your data frame. I do that manually. It's like I pull and push the rectangular data where the Excel style math occurs, and then I go and I paint in the titles. Probably still going to do it that way, but I can do it that way more easily under just GSpread. So I get my dependencies back down. I also strip out stuff that I just don't use anymore. The field of SEO gradually changes, so some functions that were in Pipulate I take out if I haven't touched them in forever. If anyone screams bloody murder, I'll put them back in, but I doubt that's going to happen. And I make it to be super work session friendly and super automation friendly, so that I can make deliverables with someone from scratch every time. It looks like it's from scratch. You're pip installing a library here and there, which gives you a lot of pre-baked power. So I'll be able to go site equals crawl, open parenthesis, site's homepage, close parenthesis, and that site variable will be full of a series of response objects, which is the entire site. In fact, that's not even the best way to do it. As you get those response objects, you want to offload them and get them out of memory. So you do this stuff in discrete chunks. Maybe you process all the links of one page at a time, and then you commit all those response objects to the hard drive, to your storage, to persistence using SQL, but not a line of SQL. You just use the Python dictionary API, key value pairs. And it's an easy way to plop all these response objects into a database. And then you use the increasingly familiar, kata. I talk a lot about kata, standard form, the context manager with SQLite dict file name as file handle, for each page in, a file handle. Spin through it, do some beautiful soup extraction of titles, and to do some fuzzy matching of external data. You spin through an external list for each page you found, and you do some regular expression fuzzy matching for the view source code you've stored. You might do a little stemming. You pull out the page.txt and you stem word and you stop word, and then you maybe push that back into yet another SQL database sitting right side by side, and you use these, you use SQL databases like you would use shelves, pickles and shelves. So SQL is increasingly replacing pickles and shelves that are used all over the place for, a poor man's database, poor man's persistence. So that pretty much wraps it up here. Some of the most exciting stuff I'm doing, some of the most powerful work with the least amount of thought work, technical liability, et cetera, et cetera. It's just coming natural with that kind of spontaneous mastery where you look like you're doing it from scratch every time, dazzling them in the work sessions, and then optionally taking that work and scheduling it on a weekly basis or whatever. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.